everyone to the Sister Stories podcast. The aim of this podcast is to marvel at God's sovereignty in each of our lives as women and to encourage one another by sharing our stories. My name is Sophie and today I am joined by Jean. Hello, Jean.
Hello.
Right, let's start with, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Right. Well, I'm Jean, married to Les White. I'm 89, and we've been married a very long time. In a few weeks' time, it will be 68 years since we've been married. We have 5 children and 8 grandchildren, all of whom are now adults. The youngest one being 18, and we have 2 great granddaughters.
Wow, that's great. So we're going to be talking about how you came to know the Lord Jesus Christ. But to start us off, could you tell us about your childhood and what it was like?
I had a very stable, happy childhood. Les and I grew up living in the same road. We were living in Downham, a housing estate on the edge of Bromley. And childhood then is very different than it is today. Yes. But we did have we each had a very happy childhood. My mother went to the local church, a Brethren Assembly called Brook Lane, and she was a member. And so Les and I were both sent to Sunday school at an early age. And we used to, and when I think back at my childhood, I think, well, there were 3 things. There was school, there was home, and church. Because the church provided everything we needed in the way of a social life, really. We were there all day on Sunday at meetings. Saturdays were youth groups and various things. And so that was a very stable part of my life. And we're very grateful for the help and support, encouragement that we had from the church, the leaders. And we're very, very grateful to have had such a good basic start in life.
Yes. So did you have at that time a clear understanding of the gospel?
Yes, I did, but I was quite young when I became a Christian. It was the gospel service in the evening on Sunday, and the preacher was talking about Pilate. And he said he felt a bit sorry for Pilate because he was put in a very difficult position. And he said, I wonder if Pilate we'll see him in heaven. And when I thought about it, I was 7, and I thought, well, I don't really know that I'm going to heaven, but perhaps I want to do that. And very simply, I became a Christian then. Yeah. I think because I was so young, I worried that perhaps I hadn't done it properly, so I probably did it another couple of times later on, but and that was the start of it, really. Yes.
Oh, that's great. And what role did your parents and people in the church play in that, and how did they help you to grow in your faith? Well,
my father wasn't a church member, but he used to come on a Sunday night. But my mother was a member, and they just gave us. Well, it's difficult to say because there was no sort of outward. They just encouraged us generally, and it was just I felt sort of safe at church, and there was a good crowd of young people, particularly. So we had good friends and could do things together. And as I said, the leaders were very, very, very helpful to us and encouraged us in everything.
Yeah. So did you stay in that church and in that area for later years?
We stayed. Yeah. We were in that church until we were we got married. Right. Les was in the army, and he went to army apprentice school at 15 and a half, and we became friends quite early on, as young teenagers, and so we have, as I say to people, we've known each other forever, or so it seems. Yeah.
Right. When did you get married?
We got married in 1955. I was 21 and Les was 23, so we were quite young. But Les had been with the army. He'd been in Egypt for several years, and he came home and we got engaged. And because I was young, he promised my father that we would be engaged for a year before we got married. So this is what happened, and by that time he was settled teaching in Chatham at the army school, and so we moved there after we were married.
That's great. Right, it feels like a very different time, obviously, with young men going to the army and things that we're not as familiar with nowadays. So I'm really interested to see how then things developed for you, actually, and how things are now almost, and what differences maybe you've noticed. So we can come to that a bit later. Right, so obviously you got involved in ministry in Zambia, and you were there for 60 years almost?
60 years.
Yes, wow.
Yes.
Very nice round number. So how did that happen? Did that come through the church you were at, or how did that happen for you?
Well, Les left the army. We'd had Heather by that time, and then I had twins, and he left the army, and we were living in Sidcup, and he became because he'd got quite good practical skills. He was trained in the army, and he'd learnt quite a lot as an engineer, electrical engineer mainly, and he wanted to use his gift, practical gift, to help missionaries. And so he had the idea of getting a job in Africa somewhere, and then being able to help in his spare time. But nothing really came of that. And then our church, the church that we grew up in, was very missionary orientated, and we had these two nursing sisters who were working in Zambia. And one of them was a great friend, and she'd known me from a very small child. And she came home on furlough and said that the mission where she was, which was a hospital, a 300-bed hospital in the bush, and that they were desperately in need of a maintenance man. But there was no the power, they had to generate themselves. So there was lots of practical things to do. And it was only when we thought, well, perhaps we ought to go full-time as missionaries, that the door really opened. And so we decided to go to Killarney to do that work. And it's Heather was 6 and the twins were 4 when we left to do that.
Wow, okay. And did you? How long were you involved in that ministry, and did you move to another place afterwards?
Well, we went to Killarney, and we were there quite a few years, and the children had to go to boarding school.
Yes.
Which is one of the most difficult things that we had to face, was sending our children away. But it was a school for missionaries' children, and it was only half an hour's drive away from us. So although they had to board, we did have them home regularly. And then the government centre was 50 miles away, and they built a secondary school there, which and everything was being done in English. And there was one of our missionaries was there teaching scripture to half the school, and the Catholic father was teaching the other half. And she was going home on furlough, and furloughs in those days were long, a year. She was going to be away for a year. So the missionaries, senior missionaries, were quite concerned that if no one did that job, then we would lose our position in the school, which was very important. And by that time, I think Les had got someone else to help him with the maintenance. And because he hadn't he wasn't terribly good at the local language, it was decided that he should go. And so, being junior missionaries, we did as we were told, and we moved to Winilunga to teach scripture in the school. We did that for a year. By this time, Heather was 14, and there were no good secondary schools that we could send her to in the country. And so there were two alternatives that missionaries had at that time. One was that you sent your children overseas and didn't see them for a couple of years, or even longer in some cases, or you packed up and you went home with your family. And we didn't really like either of those options. But while we were living in Winilunga, they were building a power station. It was to put them on the national grid. It was being built by Russians, and Les, really on the off chance, went into head office and to see what qualifications were necessary for a district engineer to run this power station. And he hadn't by any means got all of them, but he was offered the job of district engineer. So this meant that we could stay in Winilunga. We could still do the Christian work amongst the school children. They used the secondary school. We had a service for them on Sunday morning that the whole school had to attend, and there were various other things that we did there, and so it meant that we could stay in Winilunga, but the company would pay for Heather to go to UK and come out for the holidays. And as far as we were concerned, this was God providing for our family. It meant complete change, and we came off the missionary list, but we really did believe that this was God's provision for our family. And
can I ask you as well, so you said you were involved in different jobs around the place. Were you helping with the Sunday school and teaching the children there?
Not at Winilunga, but the school was being staffed by quite a lot of expatriates.
I see, yeah.
There was a Zambian headmaster, but there weren't many Zambian teachers at that time, and there was tremendous work amongst these expatriates. There were probably about 30 of them. Quite a lot came from the UK. What happened was that you would get a couple, both perhaps teachers. They would come out and do 1 or 2 contracts and save up enough money to go back and buy a house. And so there were English people, French, Russians, so many different nationalities. And there was nothing for them to do in Winilunga. There was no sort of social or life for them. And so certainly when we started, when they started running the power station, we had a house which was attached to the job, a fairly big house. And we used to have open house on a Sunday evening. And there was also an English-speaking service in the local Zambian church on a Sunday. So there was quite a lot going on amongst the staff there.
Yeah. So what did you get on to do next? I know there's quite a few more.
Then we were coming to the end of his first contract. I mean, we started in 1970, so we were now up to 1973. And he was coming to the end of this contract, and then the next two children were due to go to the UK. So we moved to because Winilunga was a sort of a tin pot little station in the bush. They wanted Les to be more involved in the town, in the head office, and that area. And so we went on leave and got the next two children settled at school in the UK, and came back to Ndola, which is one of the Copperbelt towns. There's a whole range of about 6 towns all close together that were the mining towns. But of course there was lots of industries that are connected with the mine there. And so Les actually left the power company and went to work for one of these firms, engineering firms, and we did that for quite a few years.
Yeah. Okay. And what next then? Sorry, I'm just carrying on with the story.
Personally, I hadn't been doing very much up to this point. I'd been raising children, but when we were in Kitwe, the last two children went off to England. So it was 1977, and then I got involved in a private primary school. I'm a trained secretary, and I got the job of as a secretary at the school. And there were always good schools for the mining children, but the children of the companies, they needed their own school. So this was the school that was built for them. And I was involved in that right at the beginning, literally right at the beginning. And I was involved in that for 10 years. Helped to build up the school. We started off with 4 pupils, and then at the end of the first term, the school had risen to 40-something. And by that time, we had obtained a piano. And so the very first Christmas of that year, the headmistress and I put on a carol concert. And the children had to learn all the words and learn them at home. Mm-hmm. And I was able to put in quite a few evangelical carols, meaningful carols. Mm-hmm. And this tradition carried on well after I left school. Mm-hmm. And then, that was an influence that I felt I could have. That I also got very, very involved in music. I'd played the piano since I was a small child, and I got involved in music. So, although I was just the receptionist, the secretary, I did all sorts of other things, and that was a very, very happy time in my life for 10 years. All this time, Les had been working in various. In fact, he'd been working for another power company, but he had been led into farming. He was interested in farming, and the power company had a small farm, and one day the managing director got cross with his farm manager and sacked him on the spot. And then he knew that Les was interested in farming, because by that time we were trying to run a farm up in the bush. So he asked him to take it over in the meantime. And then, of course, as so often happens, that job just continued until in the end Les was in charge of 4 or 5 mine farms. So that's where he got his farming experience. All the time he was still on the books as an engineer, but he was actually farming. And then we got involved with the other farmers in the district, and there were sort of ways in which we were involved in the community, and they all knew what we stood for. And it was amazing the small things that you could do to witness to them.
Yeah, sorry. How long did you stay in that farm?
So Les was a bit. He was finding life a bit difficult in the company he was working for, because his boss was. There were things going on that weren't right, and being a Christian, it's difficult to cope with that, and so we decided that we wanted to go up and try the farm up in the bush to really make a go of it. By this time, there was one of the men that we were doing it with was actually running it, and so he was very keen to get to the farm, and so we moved up there. It was very hard for me to leave the school, because I'd been very, very happy at it, and they gave me a wonderful farewell. And so we did that for about 4 years. So we're now up to 91, something like that. And it was a very, very happy time, because Les had he'd put in a hydro scheme there. He built a big dam, dammed the river, and made 2 lakes from the river, and so it was a lovely place to live, and we were very happy there. And then the other two men that were with us wanted to go on and do something else, and there was no way we could run the farm on our own. I was absolutely devastated, because I thought, we were there for good. And I was crying every day as to why we had to leave this wonderful place and what had God got in mind for us. But then over the years, we had known Barry and Rachel Haig, been very involved with them. And Barry was, at that time, building a Christian training centre is its title. Yeah. His idea was to start a Bible school, but he wasn't content with just teaching the Zambians the Bible. He wanted to cover the rest of their lives in various ways, and so he had a small clinic. And then the other main thrust of the work was trades training, because if you train someone, his idea was that you trained bricklayers and carpenters, they could go back to the villages and they could earn their own living. Yeah. And so he started the training scheme, and the actual trainees started building the actual the Bible school. Wow. And Barry is a great teacher and preacher. He speaks the language absolutely perfectly. And so he did get help in the actual building, but he would say to Les, I wish you could come and help me, because he knew Les would be able to help him in so many ways, practical ways. And so we thought about it. We thought, well, perhaps this is the time that we should do that. And so we spoke to them, and we agreed that we would help them. We would come. This was Nyang'ombe is the name of the place, and it was being built just outside Winilunga. So up in the area where we knew very, very well. And so we agreed to do that. And then God's timing is just amazing, because having agreed to do that, then Rachel was suddenly diagnosed with cancer, and she needed to go back to the UK. And so we were left looking after the place. In the meantime, the other two people had come out, drawn out of the farm, so we were running that as well. So at the beginning of 92, we were commuting from Sachibondu to Nyang'ombe twice a week to keep an eye on the buildings and that. But then Barry he'd had the civil work done for a hydro scheme, and he'd got all the hydro equipment in boxes. And so in January 92, Les started to put the machinery all in place and actually build the hydro and electrify the place. And in April 92, he switched on the hydro, and it's been running more or less full time ever since. That provides 100 kVA of electricity, and so then we had to live at Nyang'ombe and commute to the farm while we finished up there. So that was really when we went to live at Nyang'ombe, was in the beginning of 92, and the people and some of those trainees there that were building the place, they are now elders and leaders in the church where we were. Yes, so and they're now grandparents, and so we sort of grew up with that family.
That's great. So you stayed in Nyang'ombe for about 30 years?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then you came back to the UK after that?
Yes. Yes. Well, the work has really increased. So at Nyang'ombe, we've got the Bible school is still the main thrust, but it's short courses for various groups of people, like leaders, evangelists, Sunday school teachers, women, all sorts of groups like that. That come only for a few weeks and that. And then the other main thrust is the trades training. There's also a clinic. Rachel started a preschool. Yeah. We have a primary school on the place, but it's a government school. But we have, input into it. I should perhaps say that the local chief gave Barry the land, for the Bible school. And then there's guest houses for hospitality, and the facilities are available for other groups. World Vision use the facilities a lot. And also when the power is off in Winninunga, the education people come and hold seminars and workshops there, and also the medical people. So the facilities are available. There's we've got a lovely campsite, and then of course we got the farm which we started. We took animals with us from our other farm to start, and there's now a herd of over 200 beef animals and a few dairy as well. And some of our senior men have their own animals running with our herds, and they're sort of looked after. And these animals are an investment for them, So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I find it amazing how God seems to have just equipped you for all these different ministries along the way, and placed you where He wanted you and where you were needed along the way, and how it seems that He helped you develop your skills, and then that helped in that last part of your ministry. That's
what's amazed me, because there's so many things that we've been into that we didn't sort of set. I mean, Les didn't set out and say, "Oh, I must get a job." It was sort of handed to him on a plate, really, and then so the experience of farming he got on the Copper Belt, and so when he arrived at Nyang'ombe, he had all the skills. I should say that on the way he had built me a house as well. In fact, he's built two, because we built one at Nyang'ombe. So he's preferred. Well, you see, very often when with missionaries, if there's no one else to do things, they do end up doing lots of things, and this is what Barry tried to do. But and so he was grateful to have the help of someone who could do it then, and then over the years Les has helped out at various other places like Sakaji School, and even the Catholic Mission if they've needed help with their hydro, and so all along the way his CV would be quite interesting now. I should say that along with the cows that we took, we also had a cold room, and he set up a cold room, and so he's also a butcher. We'd prefer.
That's very impressive, and I think it's just a great testimony of God's faithfulness throughout the years of keeping you going and calling you to these different places and equipping you for all of these little things that are very practical, but actually probably had a deep impact on the communities. Actually,
because when we first went out as missionaries, people didn't really do that. And the other thing is the commitment that missionaries made in those days. I mean, when we left England, that was it. We were starting on a lifetime's thing. So, which is all very different today, because now you hear of people going out for a couple of years to see how they like it and how they get on. And I suppose the hardest thing for us was having to send our children to school. And we've spent 60 years saying goodbye, and that has been really hard. It gets better at some stage, but having said goodbye to parents, and then when the children started going to school, and then saying goodbye to grandchildren, it was only really when I became a grandmother that I realised just how awful it was for our parents. They were the only grandchildren, and when we left, it was an adventure for us. But we left just our parents with just an awful hole, and at the time I didn't realise just how dreadful that was. But they never tried to stop us. They never complained. So it's just one of those things. And then of course once we'd started to work for the companies, then going backwards and forwards changed, because, say, the children came out for every holiday, and then we would have a leave halfway through our contract. And so by the time we were at Nyang'ombe, although we went back on the list as full-time missionaries again, there was no way that we were going to be away for years at a time, because your first commitment was for five years, which is a very long time, but then not only do you sort of lose out on family. The church that you went to, who've sent you out with their blessing, they don't know you, yes. And so for quite a few years, we have been coming back to the UK every year for 3 months or so. That keeps us in touch with our family. They're very good in that they would give us time, and we'd do things with them when we were here, and then we'd go back to Africa and they'd go back to their usual life, and that suited us as well. And then we were due, and then COVID came, of course, and we were due to come back in the April of 2020. And then the flights were cancelled and we couldn't get out till we came back in July. And then Les had various appointments, specialist appointments, and, the medical things went a bit wrong then. So we knew we would be in the UK longer. And so we were quite prepared to stay till Christmas. And then of course they brought in the vaccination program, and we thought, well, if we go back, we ought really to have our vaccinations. So we had those in January. The first ones in January of 21, and then Heather had been visiting us and staying with us at Nyang'ombe for 3 months every year since she retired as a nurse, which was sort of a decade ago. And so she was going to come back with us, and she was, being younger, she was a bit behind in her vaccinations, so we had to wait for her. And then, so we're now up to 2021, I think. And then in the April of 21, I was diagnosed with a blood problem, which meant 3 monthly blood tests and treatment very often. So there was no way that we could go back permanently, which was a great blow, because we had left as if we were just coming on leave and then going back. So, but we have managed to visit twice, because we needed to sort out our personal things and the house and everything. So
have you passed on that ministry to someone else now?
Well, for quite a few years, in fact 20 years, another engineer came out, and he completely transformed the place. 20 years younger than Les, and he gradually took over the work that Les was doing. So the last few years we have not been hands-on as much, but when Gordon and Sybil go on leave for 3 months, then he was there to sort of look after the place. Although I must say the Zambians are very, very well trained now, but they would consult him if necessary. But they can run the place on their own. But we were there to encourage and help, and I was busy doing various things. The churches and individuals from the UK would send out stuff in containers, so I would unpack all the boxes and write to all the people who sent stuff, and then I got involved in sewing, in teaching sewing, because the Bible school, there was one Bible school that was early on that was for 5 months, and that was really good because we got to know the students. In fact, there were even two babies born, I think, in that period. But Rachel used to sew with the men. They used sewing machines, and so I decided to do patchwork with the women. I'd only recently learned patchwork, but because it was a long Bible school, they were free sometimes in the afternoon, so we used to do our sewing in the afternoons, and that was very good. And then the Bible schools got shorter and shorter because students couldn't really afford to pay for their food and that, so the Bible schools got shorter, and so there wasn't physically time to sort of do that. But then, as well as the trades training in carpentry and building, they started a sewing group mainly for women who perhaps were widows, to teach them skills that they could look after their family. And so they come and they have about a 5-month course, and there's a very good Zambian teacher. But if they used to have to stay on the place, live on the place. But then they only had their lessons in the morning and nothing at weekends. And their dormitory was very close to our house, and I'd see them sitting outside just doing nothing in the afternoons. And so I thought, well, I could perhaps work with them. So I started working with those. There were about 12 of them normally. And we did, I just taught very simple patchwork, but useful things, like they would start off with something small like a bag or cushion, and then make small quilts. So they always had something nice to go home, and they learnt. And if they were industrious enough, they could carry on, because they weren't using machines; it was all by hand. And so I've done that for quite a few years. I also did some interesting things with typing, because there was a missionary in Congo, Zaire, and she was very good at translation, and she had written a grammar book and a dictionary in Lunda, and so I typed those manuscripts for her, and then I typed her life story. She was a very what I can't think of the word, but a very interesting woman, strong-minded, and she was in bed. She wasn't actually sick, but she had to stay in bed, and her daughter was desperate, and said, "Well, if you record your life story," so she did, and after she died, a relative found these 10 audio tapes, and so I typed her life story, and that was absolutely wonderful because she was a great storyteller, and I didn't have to edit what she said at all, and it was very, very interesting because I knew so many of the people that she mentioned, and she'd been a missionary right from the early stages of the mission work in Zambia, and actually she was on the mission station, the first mission station, which was actually on Kalani Hill, and so that was very interesting, and then later on, when I was at Nyang'ombe, I was asked there was a group coming out to do some sort of medical work, but they had a handbook they wanted. So one of the senior men put it into Lunda, and I typed that. But I don't know quite what happened to that. But the books that I typed are actually, in print. Yes. So.
Again, the way God used all your skills.
Yes.
Where you had available, and not. I'm just thinking how nowadays people will go for a specific career and build specific skills because they want to achieve a certain goal, but you just used what you could do and
yes.
the work that was needed. So
yes.
Again, that's God's faithfulness in placing you where you were needed and just equipping you with the right things
yes.
at that time. I wonder if we can move on to more recent years, and obviously being back in the UK with the situation you described with COVID, and if there are any lessons that God has taught you in that time.
Well, I think too, being grateful for what we've had. I'm the most unadventurous person, and I hate change. But when I think of what we've been through, what God has brought us through, I'm just so grateful that He brought us through those things, and that I've been happy. Wherever I've been, I've always been happy then. Like when I left the farm, I told you I was crying every morning. When I got there and settled down, I thought, why did I doubt God? This is wonderful. Wonderful place outside, lovely people to be with, doing a nice job. It was so. I'm very grateful, and then I think trying to be content with now. Yes. I must admit, I'm still learning that because life is so different. I do miss Nyang'ombe tremendously. I miss the people and just what we had there, and the other thing is just being grateful for how we've been looked after in a sense, practically. I mean, when we went out as missionaries, we were living by faith is the term that's used, where you do not know where your money is coming from. I mean, in this day and age, that would be sort of foolhardy in a sense. But we were never short. I mean, sometimes we had to wait for things, but, God has financially supported us all that time, and just having, just learn to trust God, yes.
Yes. I guess by extension, if there is any advice you would like to give to younger Christians, what would it be?
Well, I was, we were brought up that you read the Bible and pray every day, and that is one thing that I think is very good. I mean, you don't necessarily learn anything particularly every day, but just the getting into the habit of doing it, so that when times are tough, you still do it, and it just keeps your connection with the Lord. And And also, and we're grateful for our church, and you need to be with other people of God's family.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Jean, for sharing your story with us today. And thank you everyone for listening. That's all for today's episode of Sister Stories, but join us again next time.